My cause today is to decode homoerotic and queer art with the foremost educator on this topic, Ignacio Darnaude. An art scholar and lecturer, his ongoing project, Breaking the Queer Code in Art, uncovers the creative alibis used by queer artists to express their forbidden desires during repressive times. His recent lectures include Don't Say Gay, the Erasure of Queerness in Art for the University of San Francisco, and Exploring Queer Art History through a Latin American canvas for the Museum of Latin American Art. Ignacio is a regular contributor to the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine and was recently honored with an arts grant from the city of West Hollywood for his 4-lecture series about the impact of queer artists throughout history. When I visited Florence, Italy, I of course had to seek out Michelangelo's sculpture of David. Despite all the images I had seen of it, it took my breath away in its presence. I was truly experiencing the masterpiece for the first time. However, I wondered if I was also experiencing Michelangelo's homosexuality, that as a gay man seemed so palpable to me in his artistic expression. I then wondered if there was Americana-themed homoerotic and queer art to discover as well. So let's pull back the curtain and decode the coded art right under our noses in some of the masterpieces created by American artists. Well, thank you for joining me, Ignacio. This is going to be fascinating, all in all, believe me.
I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for having me.
I'm glad. I'm very, very excited. But first and foremost, I want to know what motivated you to seriously investigate homoerotic and queer art, and then decide to curate it in a public lectures about these two categories of art. How did that all come about?
Well, the name of my project is Breaking the Gay Code in Art, and it started in a very unusual way. I used to work in the film industry. I was head of international marketing first for Disney and then for Sony Pictures. But art was always my passion. It was what I loved, and I traveled all around the world. I saw hundreds of exhibitions. And one thing that I realized is that many of the artists that I loved happened to be gay, but not the ones that everybody knows about, like, Keith Haring or Mapplethorpe. Many others that I didn't realize they were gay until much later. So that really piqued my interest. It's like, why am I reacting so strongly to these artists? And I discovered that many artists from the Renaissance all the way to David Hockney in present times, they use secret gay codes in their work. Also, that there are secret gay images hiding in plain sight in iconic works of art. So when I realized this to me was such a, I have no words, such a revelation that it galvanized me, and it made me leave the film industry over a decade ago to start developing this project, Breaking the Gay Code in Art, in which I do lectures, as you mentioned. I do articles for the Gay and Lesbian Review. I have my Instagram, Breaking the Gay Code in Art. I'm working on a documentary series on the project. So that's how I started. But the reason why I'm still doing it, why it became my life mission, is because I know that the LGBTQ community is in desperate need for positive role models, for positive images. And when I give my lectures and I see people's reactions from all kinds of ages and sexualities, and I see how their eyes get wide open and they gasp when they realize the tremendous impact of gay artists throughout history, that gives me so much, power to keep doing it, because it's very empowering.
Wonderful. So highly motivating. Huh?
Yeah.
Are they two distinctly different approaches to art, or are they basically the same? Homoerotic versus queer art, and the distinction, is it as simple as homoerotic art possesses covert messaging and queer art possesses overt messaging? Is it that simple?
It is, but it's not that simple.
Okay.
But you are very much right. I defined a homoerotic image as one that is not overtly sexual, but is very appealing to the gay viewer in a subtle or not so subtle sometimes way. And the history of queer art has evolved hand in hand with the evolution of the perception of same-sex relationships throughout history. So, for instance, in ancient Greece, the relationship between an older man and a younger man was completely accepted, and it was part of the young man's education. But it all changed with the advent of Christianity in the 4th century, and laws in which the male masculinity was punished with the death penalty. So what is really interesting to know is that these laws that were not repealed in many countries until present time, for instance, in the UK, male homosexuality was criminalized until 1967. So because of these prosecution, queer artists had to find creative ways, homoerotic ways, coded ways to express their same-sex desires. That's why art history is completely overflown with homoerotic images.
Oh. Well, I'm here to discover these coded images. I once thought that the suggestive undercurrent of homosexual themes in homoerotic art first emerged in the art history and then transformed into obvious, blatant homosexual themes in queer art. However, from experiencing some of your lectures, I've come to realize that these two art forms are still alive and living in parallel to this day. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. And you express it really beautifully. What happens is, nowadays, most modern day artists really are free to choose between creating an openly queer image or a coded image. But notice how I say most. The reason being that in many countries around the world, many artists are still forced to hide, to code their same-sex desires in their work. I mean, we may believe which is a fantasy, that the persecution of homosexuality is an old piece of news, but it's not. I mean, over 70 countries still criminalize homosexuality today, and at least 8 of them with the death penalty. So that is, once again, forcing artists to express themselves in a coded way.
So it is not a phenomenon of the past.
No, it's not.
At all.
And it may be of the future.
And it may, indeed.
Unfortunately.
Did it all start with Donatello in the 1400s? As research suggests, he sculpted the first statue of a male nude erected in Europe since antiquity.
Yeah.
So is that the beginning, or per se, or?
Okay. That's a perfect question too. And I'll tell, but before I get into the specifics of Donatello, which is a very important point, one of the key goals of my lectures, of my project, is to shatter the false general belief that queer art is a modern concept or is just a footnote in art history. I find really shameful that schools don't teach students that queer art has appeared in every culture and in all media, from the Egyptian tombs all the way to today's, queer artists. So now that I mentioned this, now I can go back to Donatello. Meaning he wasn't the one, but he was a crucial artist. So he created this bronze sculpture of David, and it represented the story of David versus Goliath, and he created it around the 1440s in bronze. And what's interesting about it is that behind this facade of religious or historical elements of David and Goliath, this statue has a very subversive and queer side, which turned it into, as you really properly said, probably the first gay icon in history. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of these queer elements. So the first thing you notice when you look at the statue is that David is naked. you know, with the exception of the helmet, the sandals, and the shin guards, he's naked. And then if you look at him from the back, with his smooth and sensual body with the long hair, it's nearly impossible to tell his gender, you know? And, but there's more. I mean, the artist, Donatello, chose not to have him in a heroic pose. He used a pose that is associated to the queer community, which is the contrapposto, in which all the weight is shifted into one foot. And David has his buttocks really thrust towards the viewer. So it's all very queer. But the most queer part of it, and which doesn't have any basis on the Bible or on anything, is that Donatello had, emerging from Goliath's helmet, 5 feathers that look like 5 fingers in a hand that are really climbing up David's inner thigh, like caressing it sensually. And I find that really shocking and striking in the 1440s. But to put it in a historical context, Donatello created this in Florence. And Florence at the time had such a widespread acceptance of homosexuality that gay sex was known in many countries as the Florentine vice. So that is the context where he created this piece.
So, in a way, it was accommodating the mentality or the tolerance in Florence.
Yes.
But it didn't necessarily land that way all over.
No, it's interesting because it's hard to tell if it was considered at the time a homoerotic piece or in any shape or form, because it was displayed in the courtyard of the Medici Palace openly. So you would think that if it's there, it was considered like something completely acceptable.
And the fact that it was the first male nude since antiquity.
Since antiquity.
That is a big leap.
It's huge. This sculpture, as you said, is revolutionary.
Yes.
It really is not the first, but really is a key watershed moment in queer history.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I am most intrigued by homoerotic and queer art that utilizes Americana themes, which, of course, are artifacts of the culture of the United States, and is used to convey same-sex eroticism that somehow, and I don't know how, sidestepped the puritanical condemnation, America's puritanical condemnation of homosexuality. And it is amazing to me some of these things happened right in the midst of this. I mean, we're the most puritanical nation on earth. And yet we have artists that are just masters. They're the greatest artists that America has ever produced, creating this kind of art.
I love that. You're absolutely right. That's why I'm so passionate
It's
about
incredible.
this.
And of course, I never knew that or thought about that. But you've introduced me to 5 American artists whose art reveals their queer lives. And the first I want to talk about is Thomas Eakins. He's considered one of America's greatest artists for his realistic depiction of human figures, often in motion. And that was really revolutionary at the time. Do you think the homoerotic themes were incidental to his artistic pursuit of the human form, or that they were a key aspect of what he wanted to convey in his art?
Well, you're asking $1 million question, that's such a great question, but it's a question that is controversial to this day, which is astonishing to me. So Eakins, as you said, is one of probably America's most important artists of the 19th and 20th century. So his paintings today, they sell for millions of dollars, but he was a very controversial artist during his time. And I find insulting is that to this day, art historians refuse to acknowledge his homosexuality. as if it was something shameful or irrelevant, when I believe it's just the opposite. It's crucial to understand his work. And Eakins took many photos of male nudes of himself, of his very handsome studio partner, whom, according to all accounts, was the most important relationship in his life, even after Eakins got married. So that in itself is an important sign. So if you want, when I researched it and I went through his letters, there's one letter that I always gives me a giggle. He wrote to his parents and he said, "A woman's body is the most beautiful thing in the world, except for a naked man." So you know,
that's not helpful.
It's not helpful. That's exactly my point. So it's just, you know, in any case, if I really want to properly address your question about Eakins, I need to say something very important, which is we cannot apply the modern concept of homosexuality to Thomas Eakins.
Oh, and what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think it's tempting to talk about homosexual artists from history, but the reality is that Thomas Eakins lived at a time in history in which he created his work, his homoerotic work, before the term homosexual was coined, which in English didn't happen until 1891. So men of Thomas Eakins' era didn't think or believe that having relationships with other men, having sex with other men, was anything abnormal or put them into a category of homosexuals. Mm-hmm. So getting married and having a family was a duty. It was in no way, shape, or form a proof of exclusive interest in the opposite sex. So it all changed with the Oscar Wilde trials around 1895. That really was a crucial moment because that is when gay identity emerged. That's when all of a sudden it was called homosexual love. That's when all of a sudden male nudes were considered taboo and suspect. So this shift in the perception of male nudity really is at the core of how one of Eakins' most important paintings, The Swimming Hole, was perceived at this time and how it impacted his career.
So can you decode The Swimming Hole for us? What are we looking at?
Okay. So The Swimming Hole is one of America's most beloved paintings, and universally is regarded as this visual poem to male youth in an idyllic setting. That's how it's described. But the reality is that underneath this painting, this bucolic feeling, there is a very strong sexual current, which turned it into probably maybe the first contribution of homoerotic art in American art history.
Is that right?
Uh-huh. So Eakins painted The Swimming Hole as a commission, and he engaged some of his students to pose nude outdoors for it. But Eakins knew that the painting was going to stir trouble. So he tried to cover that by loading the painting with coding, with classical codes. So if you look at it, the central figure standing on the rock is posing like Donatello's David. So this classical coding, he wanted to do that to give the painting a patina of respectability. But the patron who commissioned it, when he received it, he was shocked. And he rejected it.
This is not what he
wanted. In fact, he responded by saying, "Please replace it with a painting that I can donate to a museum one day." that was his actual response. But
how ironic, I might add.
It is, don't you think?
Yes.
But the truth is that whether he wanted it or not, Eakins broke so many conventions with this painting. So he could have chosen a fantastical image. But no, he chose a realistic image and of male nudes with no narrative justification for it. And he chose recognizable young students from the school and a recognizable local setting.
Wow.
Outside of Philadelphia. So it couldn't be more daring. And so these were all no-nos at the time, you know? And this is one of the scandals that ended up with Eakins being expelled from the Pennsylvania Academy as a teacher.
Wow.
But just to summarize everything I just said, I believe that Eakins created work with homoerotic feelings. I believe that he had relationships with men, but I feel that we shouldn't apply the modern label of homosexual to him, as I said, and maybe a better way to describe him is with the new term of queer.
Interesting. It's amazing because he, whether he meant to or not, contributed substantially to that ambiguity. And it's wondering how much consciousness did he have to that?
That is funny because I think that ambiguity is, in a way, what keeps historians, giving them the leeway to say, oh, no, let's not discuss about it. But at the same time, it's what keeps him current and modern at the same time.
That's right. And his options open in a sense. Wherever his art would take him.
Exactly. But I mean, I think his work speaks volumes.
I do too.
So... The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's that ambiguous.
No.
Well, on to the next, Cecilia Beaux.
Okay.
She was the greatest female painter of her time, and she was a rival of John Singer Sargent in fashionable portraiture, right? And in fact, Eleanor Roosevelt, ironically perhaps, Eleanor Roosevelt honored her by saying that she was an American woman that contributed or made the greatest contribution to culture in the world, which has quite a distinction from Eleanor for her work. So was she that did her artistic ability allow her to interject or to place homoerotic themes, lesbian themes in her paintings without any particular notice or public condemnation? She just got away with it, in a sense. And I know she was excellent. I mean, excellent is an understatement, artist. Was it just her work was so magical, it really didn't matter?
Well, let's talk about that because, like you said, our critics said that Cecilia Beaux was not only the best female artist of her era, but of all history. So that's how highly regarded she was. But before I answer your question, again, I need to go back a little bit in history because I love contextualizing the evolution of queer art because that's the only way to understand and to address your question properly. So I believe it's very important to talk about how the perception of same-sex female relationships has evolved throughout history. And just to give you a couple of tidbits, during the Renaissance, sex was only considered sex if there was phallic penetration. So female sex was not considered sex. Okay?
Okay.
Yes. And then there was a law in 1885 that broadened the prosecution of male homosexuals, didn't include female sex because, once again, it was unimaginable.
They didn't see it that way.
Exactly. So then the work it was described as the romantic friendships between women. And it's romantic friendships that may include, or they did include, living together, love letters, having sex. And what is extraordinary, and I'm going to quote somebody from the era saying that these romantic relationships between women were harmless diversions that kept women out of trouble until the right man came along and awakened their sexuality. So that's how it was considered at the time. So these relationships were called Boston marriages, and the name came from Henry James' book, The Bostonians, and they were completely acceptable. In fact, it was much more scandalous for a woman to live alone. And it wasn't until the very end of the 19th century that sexologists started looking into these Boston marriages, and then the word lesbian started popping up. But at the end of the century.
Well, how did this all impact Cecilia Beaux?
Well, so Cecilia Beaux didn't identify herself as a lesbian because that term had an indecent connotation, and even though she had sexual relationships with women. So instead, she identified herself as part of an early feminist movement that was called the New Women. And see, these were women who rarely got married, if at all, and who pursued education and careers that were usually denied to women.
Huh?
And Cecilia Beaux is famous for painting many scenes, intimate scenes, ambiguous scenes with female figures. Again, you could interpret them in many different ways. The intimacy and the sensuality is palpable, but it's not overt. And she also painted many portraits of her young lover, who was the love of her life, called Dorothea Gilder, who was the daughter of a couple of patrons. And doing the research on Cecilia, it's so amazing that to read her letters. So she wrote Dorothea 2 sets of letters. One with small talk and gossip that Dorothea could share with her parents, and other ones with passionate love letters in which she said, "I long to be in the farm, holding your warm arms," etc. So I love how she compartmentalized her life into the letters. But what is fascinating is that in spite of the intensity of this relationship, when Cecilia Beaux wrote her autobiography, she barely mentioned Dorothea.
Well, she wanted to keep it under control, apparently.
Exactly. And also, it's interesting, the one thing that I also found out in research is that she was very close to a couple of gay neighbors that lived together, male, but she was very, I don't know what the word is, she used demeaning words.
Really?
To talk about the fact that they were together and they were open about it. That was very interesting.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was a complicated person.
Yes, she was. No, she was a woman of her time.
That's true. And we only, I'm always looking at things through a modern lens, particularly in the gay world, the queer world. And you're right, it doesn't connect that way.
No, it doesn't. That's why I over-explain the historical context, because that's the only way to put it in the real
and how their work was received also was a product of all that.
Yeah.
And she did amazing things with her opportunities and her talent, enormous talent. Well, that brings us to J.C. Leyendecker. Okay. He created the ideal American male image. I mean, the original, that inspires me and makes me want to aspire to things to this day. Was the homoeroticism in his art just solely because he was a homosexual, or do you think that it was just the nature of commercial art making in its day, and they created the perfect American man to sell clothing and shirt collars and all kinds of things, and he was the Calvin Klein of his time, except he was the artist that created it, as far as I can tell, out of whole cloth. I mean, it wasn't there, and then he put it there.
The answer is all of the above.
Wow.
I think Leyendecker was the right artist at the right time. So he appeared in the Roaring 20s, And the Roaring 20s, they were desperate to leave behind all the conservative mores of the Victorian era. So at that time, the advertising companies, the clothing companies, they were desperate to find images that would establish fashion, they would establish trends. And Leyendecker style was unique and perfectly suited for this. And to your point, he created groundbreaking queer imagery that defined the fashionable American male of the early 20th century. But what is even more extraordinary is that the model for many of his paintings was his life partner, a Canadian guy called Charles Beach.
Wow.
How twisted is that?
How amazing.
Beautifully twisted is that?
Yeah. How good for him. Can you, tell me more about their relationship then, he and Beach.
Well, so it all started when Charles Beach, who was a drop-dead gorgeous Canadian, showed up at Leyendecker studio offering his services as a model. Leyendecker was older. They were very different personalities. But really, that was the beginning of a 50-year relationship. A relationship that helped Leyendecker transform into the most important American artist of his era. That's how important it is. And their big breakthrough came when Leyendecker pitched a shirt company the idea of creating a unique symbol for the shirt company. What you described, the ideal American man, the arrow collar man. That was the name of the shirt. And this arrow collar was, if I had to describe it, he would be handsome and he would be preppy and athletic, and he would have a very desirable body underneath an exceptional poise. He would have a chiseled face and a very firm chin that showed passion and determination. So these ads not only defined the American male, but it really became the symbol of a new and vigorous America. And this campaign for Arrow Collar Man from Leyendecker, it caught lightning in a bottle. Arrow Collar shirts cornered 96% of the market because of this campaign. And it turned the Arrow Collar Man into a sex symbol. 1 month alone, in the headquarters of Arrow Collar, they received over 17,000 letters from fans of this image, that person that doesn't exist, right. Many of them with marriage proposals. And I just find ironic that I guess they didn't know that the man they were in love to was the lover of the artist who made him a superstar. So it's just twisted.
Leyendecker, you could do a whole show on.
You can.
Easily.
It's one of my passions that you could be talking for hours.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
But tell me more about his homoerotic work.
Yes.
And
so besides the Arrow Collar Man, which is homoerotic in just the beauty of the male physique, that's in itself.
Right.
But he also created many ads featuring men in intimate, ambiguous relationship, looking at each other very lovingly, longingly, that's the word, longingly, ads that when you look at them today, a century later, they appear very homoerotic to our modern eyes. So in my research, what I realized that it would be very tempting to reclaim Leyendecker from a modern standpoint as this visionary artist who created these suggestive scenarios from his own wild imagination. But the reality is different. So what Leyendecker was doing is basically, he was just depicting the attitudes of his era, which were more relaxed than now. So he was depicting all these, how society encouraged men to engage in homosocial relationships in close quarters, such as, like gyms, clubs, sports events, etc. And so these environments allow the kind of homoerotic interactions, the kind of some kinds emotional, even physical intimacy that is no longer allowed today. So basically, he was capturing his era.
He was.
But what was subversive about it, there is a subversive side to it, is that he inserted his own lifestyle in the ads by using his partner as a model. And going back to your Calvin Klein point, I find that, or I describe him as revolutionary because he created these ads which are considered or called gay vague. Gay vague. But they really paved the way for today's gay specific ads from brands like Calvin Klein, Abercrombie, etc. And to me, what it proves is that the homoerotic imagination has always been a key part of consumer culture.
Wow. The term metrosexual comes to mind with regard to him.
For sure. He probably invented the metrosexuals of his time.
Exactly. And it was kind of implemented in, not so long ago.
Exactly. Here. But he invented it.
Wow. And he did it without any hesitation, or he was never a guy that lacked confidence in what he was doing?
The numbers, the sales support it. Why would anybody, not only that, because of the success, other companies were clamoring for his, Kuppenheimer. I mean, he had done before the most homoerotic ads for Ivory soap. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's just unbelievable.
And some of his most famous illustrations are Ivory soap.
And also, which I haven't mentioned, he also changed the American magazine because he completely modernized the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, which was the most important magazine to reach the mass media consumer. And he really reinvented it. And once again, he did it in many cases with homoerotic images using Charles Beach as a model. So again, the most mainstream media with homoerotic images with his life partner.
It's just mind-blowing,
I think.
I have to say. when you enlightened me that
I love it.
Oh my gosh. Well, that brings us to someone who was not as confident, maybe, as far as I know, and look at his work. But Grant Wood painted the iconic work, American Gothic, sober and stoic as can be,
and queer,
and just one of the most, like the Mona Lisa, one of the most famous works of art in the world. Is it my imagination, or does the homoeroticism in some of his art bring to mind or come across as a repressed homosexuality? And it was sort of evident to me that this was a source of pain for this artist. But tell me, am 100%. I on board? Am I?
No, you are 100% right. Again, Grant Wood is one of my big passions. I went to Iowa last year to go to all the locations where he lived, where he worked, and it was unbelievable to see that in person. And I've been working on him for over a decade, and I realized that it's so easy to fall for the fantastical image he created of the homespun artist of rural America, and I have dozens of books on him, and 99% of them stick to this official version of his life, keeping him in the closet. But it all changed when the Whitney did a retrospective a few years ago in which they declared, and I love that line, that Grant Wood's homosexuality is the code that unlocks the truth to his art. So that to me gave me so much, because that's exactly how I feel. And like you said, Grant Wood is known around the world for the American Gothic, which is as iconic, as known as the Mona Lisa. And he was a queer artist in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. At a time when expressing his sexuality openly would have sent him to prison.
Oh, absolutely.
So what did he do? So he embraced a art movement called regionalism that glorified rural America. So this movement allowed him to fabricate a persona. So then all of a sudden he was wearing denim overalls, and meaning, no, this is a man's work.
Yes.
And basically he branded himself the farmer artist of America.
Who works with his hands.
Exactly. The farmer artist of America who was, wholesome.
Yes.
And of course, heterosexual.
I must.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way around
Yes.
it. Poor man. But he did it. And can you tell me what was going on in Grant Wood's life when he painted American Gothic? Because there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on
in that piece.
So when I went to Iowa, I saw the studio, which was literally the size of the studio, or kind of, where he lived and worked with next to his mother and his sister, Nan, who watched him like a hawk. And that's a whole story in itself. And also his studio assistant, Arnold Pyle, which was his constant companion, and he was completely in love with. Yeah. Yes. So in 1930, which is a crucial year in his career, he painted a portrait of his assistant called Arnold Comes of Age, which was a coded portrait showing his devotion for him. And that same year, he painted American Gothic, which, as you mentioned, shows a couple of very stern farmers in front of a house with elongated face matching the windows. And Grant Wood's sister, Nan, who was 30 at the time, posed for her. And Grant Wood's dentist,
Posed for the male, for the farmer.
For the farmer. So the painting, the minute it came out, was an instant, a huge sensation. So everybody was asking questions. Are they father and daughter, husband and wife? And if they're husband and wife, how come one is older than the other, And some critics described it, this painting is a bedrock of American values. And another one said, oh my God, damn you, you are mocking rural America.
You could see anything you
wanted on it. And
Grant
Wood loved the controversy. But to me, what is really important is the fact that because of the fact that he created Arnold Comes of Age, the portrait of his assistant, and Grant Wood, and American Gothic the same year, it's not far-fetched to interpret American Gothic as a depiction of how his sister is wearing their mother's clothes, which is very Freudian, is watching him like a hawk throughout all this. In fact, I can talk about this for hour, but his sister denied his homosexuality even after decades that he passed. And that's why a lot of historians have to stick to that story.
Because the sister
is
still watching it like a hawk, wherever she is.
Even.
Wow. So he was really cocooned, or you could look at it as either protected or imprisoned.
I think in a way they gave him protection because, I'm with mother. But it's interesting that the minute the mother passed away, he got married.
Oh, he did?
Yes, but the marriage was a complete disaster that ended in an awful way for him. So,
that was his life.
Yeah.
Wow. He did that one painting would make, I mean, it's out, it just hit it out of the park.
Yes, he did.
Unbelievably.
From the get-go.
And it's been, as I said, it's been used as satire, as also a reverence for rural America.
Yeah.
Anything you want to do with it.
You can see whatever you want in it.
And it seems to dignify, despite its whatever it's used to convey.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary accomplishment.
And actually, the house that is in the painting is still there in Eldon, in Iowa.
Is it?
And I was there, and I took my picture, of course, posing like it. And it tells you how iconic and timeless is that painting.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. Well, did he actually have covert homoerotic work that he?
Oh God!
That he actually
did he? So
okay.
I mentioned before how the regionalist movement gave him kind of this farmer straight cover, but unfortunately, Grant Wood couldn't come out because the leader of the regionalist movement, who was Thomas Benton, was very homophobic. So it's a painful story. So he was unable to express his sexuality openly. So what did he do? So he expressed his, as you say, repressed desires in homoerotic paintings of rural Iowa. So what does he do? So he paints naked farmers, farmers taking a bath, or very phallic silos, or in a very important painting from 1936 called Spring Turning, which, you know, when you look at it, it's like, oh, nice. Bucolic, nice hills, farms. But then when you look at it closely, what he really painted is the very solid contours and a very sensual back of a male. Not only that, he even paints the overalls and even the pockets on the overalls. So when you look at it, you really are flabbergasted. And I am not surprised that at the time, the press described the painting as queer.
So they got it.
I guess.
Anyway, now the guy that I don't know what to do with, frankly, Andy Warhol, is the king of American pop culture, with his signature Campbell's soup cans and his Coke bottles, and the strangest one was the Brillo pad boxes. Yes. And then repeat them, in a pattern all over the place. And, what gets me is he became as an iconic a figure as the commercial products that he featured in his art. He became like them in a way. And that led me to, he's completely enigmatic to me. I do not get, what is this about? What is he doing?
So you are exactly where he wants you to be.
Thank you, Andy.
So there is a very clear reason for why he's enigmatic, is because Warhol had a very complicated relationship with his sexuality, his homosexuality, which he described as his problem. So he camouflaged his sexual identity all his life. He was never out or in the closet. It all depended on the circumstances. He said, the minute you label something, you can't go back.
Yeah.
So he arrived to New York City in the early 50s to become a commercial illustrator. And remember, this was during the McCarthy era, the very homophobic McCarthy era, and also the time when abstract expressionism really was taking the art world by storm. And artists like Jackson Pollock was creating these big, bold, macho, abstract canvases. But what does Warhol do? So he started developing his identity as an artist, creating very delicate drawings of shoes for ads, drawings of men in drag, and very simple ballpen, over 1,000 simple ballpen drawings of men with brazenly gay content. And what I found revolutionary, particularly for Warhol, who was an ardent Catholic, is that he was showing happy gay men at a time when the whole moral society in America in the 50s was the opposite. And sodomy was a harshly punished felony in every state.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And he was a real strong Catholic, huh?
Ardent Catholic.
Really?
Yeah.
He's a complicated man.
No wonder
wow.
you find him enigmatic.
So when and why did his art go pop? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, it's interesting because that's why I find the sexuality so important to understand his persona. So Warhol became probably one of the most important commercial illustrators of the 50s in New York. But he soon realized that his queer drawings would only be embraced by a gay ghetto. The galleries rejected them. And that is the opposite of what he wanted, because he was a ferociously ambitious artist. So around 1959, he stopped creating these queer ads. In fact, he destroyed many of them. And he even changed his image. He went from this sophisticated man into this teeny bopper with a baby dull voice with a Marilyn Monroe wig and very ambiguous,
Yes.
ambiguous look. And all this happened when pop culture was exploding with very bold imagery in advertising, in billboards, in commercials, on TV. So Warhol took advantage of this imagery. But what is fascinating is that his homosexuality went from open to coded.
Isn't that so? He wouldn't do anything conventional. Even, I mean, do you know an artist that's gone from, overt to
You're right.
covert?
That's a very good question. I would have to think about it, but
Yeah,
I can't think of one top of my head.
But if you were to pose that and say, what artist would ever
Yeah.
do that?
Well-
Andy Warhol might well come to mind.
I have the answer for you. It's because fame was too important to him, and he
interesting?
didn't want to risk it.
Then his core love of, I assume this was all a love of art and expression, and his personal expression.
Exactly.
And he just turned on it all.
Yeah. And but going back to your question about coding, so right around 1960 and 61, he created images of Superman and Dick Tracy and Popeye, which are, for us, very straight, powerful archetypes. So you would think, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But then the reality is that he revealed in an interview later on that these characters were sexual turn-ons for him as a kid. So again, his homosexuality was encoded, and all the graphic imagery that he did from now on, and you mentioned the soups, etc.
Soup and the Brillo pad boxes.
They avoided any explicit statement about his sexuality because he wanted to keep his fame, So he went from boys kissing boys, which had a limited appeal, to Campbell soup cans, which are universally known and beloved. So there's a very conscious decision behind this. But what is fascinating and moving is that he kept creating coded image until the end of his life. And the perfect example is his partner, John Gould, died from complications of AIDS in '86. And after that, Warhol expressed his grief for his passing in a coded way in his last series, based on of the Last Supper, based on Leonardo's Last Supper. And what he did is Warhol shows Christ at the center, at the eve of his death. And for him, that's a symbol of the suffering of the queer community during the AIDS era. And he's asking for a plea for salvation. I find that very moving. That was the very last thing he did, because he died. He went to a show in Italy to show them, and he died soon after he came back.
Wow. I mean, he was so relevant and on the cutting edge of everything, including his own personal journey.
Yeah.
I mean, to go be open and then to put the genie back in the bottle.
In the bottle.
Because it served his purposes better.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. What do you mean? I know you've mentioned this in your lectures, the don't ask, don't tell policy in regards to queer artists and their recognition in the art world. What does that mean?
Wow. Well, I'm very glad you asked me that. So queer artists, like I mentioned before, had a revolutionary impact on mainstream culture from the Renaissance, until now. And you only have to look at the list of the most expensive paintings in history to see how many of them were created by queer artists, including the recent sale of Marilyn Monroe's Andy Warhol for nearly $200 million. But the irony is that in spite of this huge impact, the vast majority of the population, if you ask them, as I have, when I was working on a documentary, they cannot name any queer artists. And it's so abominable that that's the case. And you would ask, why is that?
Yeah.
But the reason is because the art world and museums, nearly to this day, they kind of try to hide the importance of an artist's queerness in how it impacted their work. So it is totally okay to talk about Picasso's female muses. But if you try to discuss the sexuality of a queer artist and how important it is to their work, the response, oh no, that's gossip, that's irrelevant, you know?
Yes.
And that is what I call the don't say gay policy, that are making curators hide same-sex relationships of artists and closet artists who should be admired.
Wow.
You know, but the good news is that things are improving, galleries are being much more open, and museums are finally acknowledging the queer heritage in their collections. And in many cases, this is because they have queer curators.
Wow. They're coming around.
Yeah.
And this is the world of art.
It is.
And you go, really? We got this problem in the world of art?
We do.
Just a quick one. Where is it going from here? Do you have any idea?
I think that the same way queer art has evolved throughout history, is going to keep evolving. I think there's going to be coded work, there's going to be overt work, there's going to be figurative work, there's going to be abstract work. You know, the politicians may try to repress it, and the queer artists are going to react in different ways. So it is going to be what it is. It's going to be shape-shifting, but it's always going to be there.
And the message will always be there one way or
another.
That's what I've learned more than anything.
It is.
It's there.
It is.
Well, thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic,
as
always. And I can't wait to hear more of what you're doing in your lectures.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And we'll have you back
when
you've done something else.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.